This episode was made possible thanks to generous supporters on Patreon.
Hello everyone, my name's Alexandra Zerner and this is yet another episode of my YouTube series dedicated to your questions and my answers, which means that if you want your questions answered by me, write them down in the comments below. In today's episode, I've got some interesting questions from my Patreon supporters and also from YouTube, so let's get started. I find the whole synesthesia phenomenon endlessly fascinating. You have previously mentioned associating notes with colors as well as experiencing some other sensory crosstalk. So I guess my question is, what are the other kinds of sensory impressions that tend to get mixed up? Also, do you find your synesthesia useful for things like memorizing songs or licks by associating them with combinations of colors, etc.? So yeah, I've got kind of synesthesia. I mentioned that quite a few times. Of course, I've got like the most popular musician synesthesia, which is like to perceive colors when I listen to music. There are some other things related to that. I also perceive the days of the week in colors. Also, the months of the year are colorful to me, and other things that get mixed up like that is, for example, often words have taste or a sense of texture to me, and sometimes they even smell. And it's just the way the words sound like, and it kind of affects me in a weird way. Sometimes when I listen to music, I also have this idea of smells and textures. So these are the things that I additionally have, like besides the colors. The way I use this in my music is when I play, the key of the song has a particular color to me. Of course, it varies in different kind of nuances depending on the chords that are happening in there. And this also gets very difficult when I need to transpose a song, because it changes the entire tint of the song for me. And say I've got a song in G major, for example, which will be kind of greenish to me, and someone asks me, okay, can we just transpose it to F sharp or F, and suddenly it becomes much more like brownish than green. And now it's like seeing one of these like very famous paintings and the colors are changed. I mean, it kind of the same song, but not really. And this somehow affects me, and I can't really think of it as exactly the same song anymore. When I compose, of course, this affects me the same way, because sometimes I just have some idea and then I decide to mix it up with some other ideas, but this requires to transpose some pieces of music, some of these riffs, and suddenly they kind of have different color and this doesn't match. And I often think of putting somewhere in between so I can make the transition smooth without changing the keys of the riffs as I compose them initially. I guess this is how it affects my creativity. And additionally, something I could say is that the tuning standard also makes a difference, because, for example, you probably know, if you pay attention to what I say and what I do with my music, that I use different tuning systems, and I most of the time don't use A equals 440 because I just don't feel like this tuning is working well with my music perception. For example, if I use this kind of tuning I use for my last album, Silhouette, the entire album is in A equals 426.7 Hertz, which is also known as scientific tuning, and it's based on C equals 256 Hertz. This is pretty much a quarter note away from what we got used to, like 440. If I play E flat minor, because there are a lot of riffs in E flat minor, very guitar unfriendly key. In this album there are a lot of these things, and I perceive them much more reddish than normally I perceive this key, because it's kind of dark purple or something like that, and D, for example, is kind of red, and when I have this E flat but this is like lower, it's a little bit more reddish than normal, because it's like going towards D somehow. And yeah, these are the things I could say now about the synesthesia. My name is Ron and I'm a musicaholic. Where's the coffee? Can you share a time when maybe you were in a creative dry spell and something inspired you to create again? A book, a movie, an artist, whatever? Well, that's true that I also get hit by the writer's block, or as you say, the creativity dry spell. And there is one notable story about one situation like that, and this was actually how I started writing music for my first solo album, 9 Stories. I couldn't compose music for a very, very long time, and it was like years, and at a certain point I just gave up, and I didn't think that I will compose anything soon. And then I started reading the book The Seducer's Diary, and somehow the story and the vibe had like huge impact on me, and I just really felt the need to describe all of these that I'm reading about, and all this feeling of walking around Copenhagen, and it's a very, very interesting atmosphere, and I wanted to recreate, and that's how I immediately started composing some pieces of this track, and this somehow opened the entire flow, and I finished the entire album for somewhere around 9 months or something. This is a good illustration of how a good book or movie could suddenly inspire me so much that the creative flow runs again. Yeah, I could say that often there are artists that inspire me the same way, and usually it's like concerts that I attend, and or a new band that I discover and I suddenly start binging. It just somehow forces my brain to start working again, because it's kind of novelty and it needs to be explored. Hi again, Alexandra. I'd like to hear about some of your tips for the non-pro, time-pressured hobby players, and how to better organize practice habits. I'm never going to be a pro, but would like to progress faster. I kind of only play on the weekends due to weekday work commitments, a family to feed, and sort of forget what I was doing. I don't really practice, just play the same old. Guess that's a rut. Well, regarding the practice when you're not really pro and you just want to keep the things going, there are just a few things that I would say that I find in the core of the practice routine. And number one is to make sure that you find just a little bit of time every single day, because this is what matters really much. I mean, if it's just like 30 minutes, but try to find this time. It's important to have this routine, because playing just on the weekends, even if you spend 5 hours, it's not leading to any tangible differences, and also it might cause damage, because if you just don't have the habit of exercising your muscles in a particular way, and you suddenly stress them out, and of course it could lead to injury. So this would be my advice number one. Advice number two would be to do 3 types of exercises. So make sure you develop your fretting hand, make sure you do something about your picking hand, and the third one is to make sure you do some hand synchronization exercises. And essentially these 3 types of things will keep your technique improving. Another thing that I think is super important is to learn songs by ear. Just put the tabs aside and try to do the song by ear, and when you feel stuck, then you can just try to go for tabs. And even then, I would rather suggest you to go on YouTube and try to find a concert or a music video and so forth, and leave the tabs for last resort. And if you just keep doing all of these things into your practice routine, this will be a nice and practical bundle to go with. To further Christopher's question, how do you balance practice with creativity and enjoy both so that you do not burn out from either one or the other? I once read an account of a young violin prodigy, sorry, can't recall his name, who played town hall in New York City while still a teenager. He even bested Itzhak Perlman at a Juilliard violin recital. Nevertheless, he said that he was traumatized at an early age by too many music lessons, and rather than pursue a career in music, he became an accountant and now lives on a sailboat. Well, that's a very difficult question, and to a certain degree I could relate to the story that you're describing, because as I mentioned before, I suffer from chronic depression and anxiety, and this has a kind of similar effect on me, because it robs me from the ability to experience joy of the things I love. It works in a similar way, because now it's when your hands are frozen and numb, so you can't actually feel anything, and you touch something that's familiar to you, you don't actually feel the texture, but you kind of know how it should feel. This is pretty much how I am approaching things that I like. I just remember how they feel like, and this is some weird type of motivation. So it's very easy to get into burnout in such a condition, and I do my practice routine, exercise and things, just to the degree so I can see that I'm becoming a better player. So if I just manage to see objectively by watching my videos or listening to my albums and so forth, when I see even a tiny bit of progress, this is a good indicator that my practice routine is doing well. And of course I can't really overdo it, because here it comes the problem with motivation, and when you experience no joy of doing things, finding motivation can be extremely difficult. Essentially, this is how I decide how much of practice routine to do on a regular basis, and the rest is essentially creativity. Yes, I could understand that if someone is so burnt out from very intense dealing with music, it could lead to a total lack of joy of doing it, and therefore you can just pursue completely different career. Although I don't think that I will ever be an accountant, because I think that this is like the furthest you can go from being an artist. But of course, this is my personal feeling on the topic, and probably if I need to change my career and don't do music anymore, I would probably be an architect or something. I have some questions about backing tracks for fun and practice. I quite enjoy playing to various online backing tracks. I mentioned that my neck navigation skills are improving, and now and then a nice melody develops. What is your view on this kind of jamming? Beneficial or potentially dangerous? Any do's and don'ts? I probably should use more of the time to do the practice routines, but jamming is more fun. Do you use online backing tracks when you feel like jamming a bit, or do you pick from your own library? And of course, I have a request. Please make a chord progression backing track for us, utilizing some of the lovely luxury chords from that Dr. Zerner Guitar Lab series, please. Well, I think that playing with backing tracks is a very, very good thing to do. The reason for that is that you're forced to improvise. It's hard to say that there are things that you shouldn't do. Of course, I think that every good preparation about the backing track and the scales that you could use there is a good thing to do in advance. Another thing that I find very important is to be able to develop this connection between your internal composing module and your guitar or whatever your instrument is. And I've said this before in other videos, that it's very practical to start singing and playing at the same time, because this is how you develop this connection. And singing is the most natural thing to do, and when you connect these both, and this is how your musical thoughts start being connected to the instrument, and when you come up with a melody, it's much easier to translate it over the instrument. So this is like a crucial part of good improvisation, because if you don't follow this process, you just rely on some box shapes and just prefabricated phrases and so forth, and basically your improvisation becomes boring, predictable, and
your music's bad and you should feel bad.
Of course, everyone uses kind of prefabricated phrases because everyone builds their own vocabulary, but to build your own vocabulary, you need to keep playing and playing and playing and improvising and jamming. So I think for sure this is a very good thing to do. Of course, it doesn't replace technical exercises and ear training and so forth, but it's a good thing to keep developing these skills even further. Regarding the backing tracks, I actually plan starting a brand new YouTube series which will be dedicated to backing tracks. I'm still thinking the concept through, but it's going to start very, very soon, and I will offer my own backing tracks, which will be like prog backing tracks. I will do some insights of them and some hints how to play on them and something like that, so stay in tune. Regarding my own jamming, if I'm lazy, I just pick up backing tracks on YouTube, but if I'm not lazy, of course, I just create something for personal use, or I use some of the things I've done before for my students, and my own library is not so big, but I still have some, so whenever I feel like jamming, it's kind of depends on whether I'm lazy or not. Good video, Xan. The bits of history are always interesting. At some point I would like to see an explanation of your recording process, both your signal path and hardware, software you're using, why you chose that configuration, and then your recording process. What instruments do you begin with, your processing techniques and mixing. This would probably be another entire episode. Keep up the good work and best regards. Well, that's indeed quite a stretchy topic, but I'll try to make it as simple as possible. I've always kept my gear and setup as simple as possible. One of the reasons for that is that since I'm coming from not so financially fortunate background, and I always needed to find creative solutions how to use very budget stuff and to take the most out of it. This of course requires a lot of tweaking, a lot of experimenting and figuring out how to use everything optimally, and I used very simple chain, and I've got the guitar, then I've got either a floor processor or a valve preamp, and then everything goes directly into the sound device and there into the computer. That's everything that I use. And for example, my first album, 9 Stories, I recorded with just Boss GT8 directly into the sound device, and that's it, nothing else. Many people actually don't believe that this is how I recorded, but that's true. This is what I had, this is what I needed to use, and I found a way just to maximize the result. The way I did that with this particular processor is that I made certain sounds and I tested them on all kinds of different setups, on PA, on rehearsal studios, on recording and clubs, big concerts and so forth, and every time I tweaked something little until I make sure that it sounds good in every possible setup that I'm with, and this is how I managed to get a sound that I'm kind of happy with it, and I use this for recording the album. And for example, my last album I also recorded with a floor processor, but this time it was the Helix, and I approached this in a similar way to figure out how to tweak the sound so I can get the most out of it. The guitars in my last album are all recorded by Helix and nothing else. Helix directly into the computer. I actually used the Helix as a sound device, so it was directly into the USB, and that's it. For aspects and for Opus 1880, I had Angle valve preamp that I bought, and after Opus 1880 I had to sell it because Pledge Music bankrupted. I, just like many other musicians, didn't get the money from the crowdfunding campaign, and therefore I needed to sell some gear so I can just fulfill the pre-orders. Luckily, I managed to buy this preamp back pretty recently, so now I'm experimenting on a new setup, which will be a little bit more complex, but it's too early to speak about that. But essentially, when I used this, I ran it through 2 Notes Torpedo Live because I needed like good cap simulation, and I used these devices, and again they went directly into the sound device. The sound device is Focusrite Scarlett, and I use it for many years already. I like it a lot. I chose it because it seemed like a very good combination of high quality and good price. I'm still using it, and I'm very happy with it. What I'm using on the computer is Logic Pro. I use it since forever. I find this software very, very composer friendly. It comes with a huge amount of bundles and libraries and plugins, and essentially you can just do quite a lot only with the things that are built in. Of course, I'm having my MIDI keyboard, and right now I am using Native Instruments Complete Control S88, the biggest one, with a nice hammer piano keyboard. I'm using a lot of libraries, mostly Native Instruments, and as I mentioned, Logic Pro comes with a lot of things inside, so I'm using a lot of them as well. When it comes to recording and mixing, first the thing that I do is to make sure that I plan everything accordingly, and I often actually sketch it on a paper so I can see how the song is going to look like, what kind of instruments I need, what kinds of sounds I need, and this helps me to envision the entire sound picture. I do this because garbage in, garbage out, and if you don't put the nice thing on the input, no amount of processing would make it actually nice. And this is why I just learned to do all the sounds as good as possible the way I need them for the particular song, and I just need to have this sound pre-cooked at the input, so I do almost no processing afterwards. And another thing that I follow as a principle is that I've said this many times, that the good mix starts from the composition, and this means that if you're mindful about different instruments and their range and their frequency, how to make space for everything, not to put so many important and complex parts at the same time, make the compromise of all of these things so you can have like a nice, well-balanced picture. This helps a lot, and when you have this taken care of before recording, the moment you record it, then it's production ready, so to speak. I mean, there are just small things to tweak, like small EQ here and there, pinch of chorus delay, reverb here and there, some panning, some compression, and basically that's it. I just make sure that the entire mix sounds well at the time of recording, and this of course makes the mastering much easier, because if you don't have problems with the mix, then the mastering is just like polishing and finishing the details. And essentially this is my concept of doing records. When it comes to composing, essentially I start with an idea, be it on the guitar, on the keyboard, and I just develop it. I start adding, for example, if I started with keyboards, I add some guitar, and basically I use 2-3 instruments maximum just to figure out the entire composition, to do the different parts, sections, transitions, and so forth. And when I have the entire track more or less ready in terms of composition and structure, then I start doing the drums. And before my last album, I was doing all the drums on a MIDI keyboard, and I was playing the beats, and you can actually see how I did that. I will post a link down in the description where you can see how I actually recorded some of the drums for Opus 1880. And after I have the drums, I start recording the bass, and at this stage everything is still demo, and I start adding some more instruments and start elaborating the composition and see what fits where, and so forth. Of course, I keep in mind all of the things about compromise and composing good enough so it doesn't jeopardize the mix. And after I'm kind of happy with the composition, I start recording the final tracks, which is the most difficult and time-consuming process. And believe it or not, but I'm doing often more than 100 takes for a single part, and essentially this is what it takes to make it like good enough and to record it well. And of course, these things usually they are happening behind the scenes. Nobody sees them. They see only the finished product, and they don't really figure out how much torture actually happens until you reach that point to have all these tracks nailed. Essentially, this is the process of creating a song, and then I said when I have everything ready and thought through in terms of how to compose it well, the mixing process is kind of easy, and you don't really do so much. I can't really say a lot about processing, and I'm just using a bunch of plugins that I use for a very long time, and these are like basic stuff like chorus, delay, reverb, and occasionally some phaser or something like that, but essentially I try to keep things simple. So that's everything for this episode, and I hope you like it. Thanks for watching, and if you want your questions answered by me, write them down in the comments below. And if you like what I do, consider supporting me on Patreon on the links down in the description, where you can get access to all kinds of interesting things like tabs, audio downloads, exclusive materials, and the membership starts as low as $3 per month. And now you can also support the channel by the YouTube membership by clicking the join button down there below, and by becoming a member you can also get access to all kinds of interesting perks. And if you wish to support me by a single donation, you can use the PayPal me link below. If you're a first-time viewer, please subscribe to my channel and click that bell notification button to get informed when I upload new video. See you next time, and prog on!